The letter that changed everything theme. Morning light broke gently over the quiet hills of Los Altos, spilling into the Pichai family's modest but modern home. Sundar sat at the edge of his daughter's bed, her tiny fingers still curled in sleep. Her name was Meera. She was 10 years old, with a mind sharper than most adults, and a curiosity that often made even Sundar pause. Her room was cluttered with books far beyond her age, books on philosophy, engineering, astronomy, even old biographies of long-forgotten inventors. There was a strange peace in that clutter, a certain wisdom in the way she had laid her world out for herself. Sundar had always believed in quiet leadership, but his daughter, she was fire-wrapped in silk dot that morning, felt different. Not because the birds sang louder or the air smelled of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. It was something else, something deeper. Sundar had received a letter the night before, slid under the door of his office. No stamp, no envelope, just thick parchment. Folded 3 times with his name written in pencil. Not CEO. Not sir. Just Sundar. Inside, only one line had been written. They will ask you to choose, and it will break something you love. He hadn't shown it to his wife or to Meera. He hadn't even told his assistant. He had simply folded it back, placed it in his drawer, and sat there for hours trying to ignore the pounding of his own heart. For a man used to data, to clarity, to algorithms and metrics, the ambiguity of that sentence was almost cruel. And yet, it echoed louder than any boardroom decision, ever. Had Dot as the sun warmed the windowsill, Meera stirred. Her dark hair framed her face like a painting. She sat up slowly, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and gave him a smile that reminded him of who he had been before Silicon Valley swallowed his days. Appa, she said in a voice still half dreaming. Do you believe people can really change the world without being broken by it? Sundar blinked. It was too early for such a question. Or maybe it was exactly the right moment. He wanted to answer her like a father, tell her that dreams were enough and that hard work always paid off. But the letter tugged at his thoughts. Sometimes. He said quietly, the world changes us first. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing in thought. That's not fair. It's not, he agreed, brushing her hair back. But it's real. He didn't know then that Meera had already made a decision that would pull their family into a story no one could have predicted. He didn't know that this girl, this curious, fearless, stubborn child, would one day stand on a stage at Harvard and say something that would silence the world for nearly a full minute. It began, as most things do, with a school project. Meera's teacher had given the class a simple prompt. Write about the person who inspires you most. The students were expected to choose someone famous, perhaps a musician or a president. Some chose astronauts. A few chose athletes. But Meera chose her grandmother, Sundar's mother, who had grown up in a small village in Tamil Nadu, walking miles to school with no shoes, carrying books wrapped in cloth to protect them from the rain. She had taught herself English by borrowing newspapers, reading them under candlelight. She became a teacher, then a principal, and eventually opened a small school for girls who had been told they didn't belong in classrooms. Me Error wrote the report by hand. She included drawings, maps, even a small diagram of the school her grandmother had built. But it wasn't the facts that made the project powerful. It was the way Meera told the story with wonder, with reverence, and with quiet fire. When she presented it to her class, her teacher, Mrs. Langford, wept silently at her desk. And when the local school board heard about it, they submitted it to a national student innovation contest without even asking. That decision changed everything. Too. Weeks later, Sundar received a phone call from a woman with a deep voice and an accent he couldn't quite place. Mr. Pichai, she said, this is Dr. Emily Rossner, chair of the Harvard Youth Institute. We'd like to invite your daughter to speak on our global impact stage next month. Her story. It moved our entire panel. We think she might move the world. Sundar didn't know what to say. He had given keynote speeches at some of the biggest conferences in the world. He had spoken to presidents, prime ministers, visionaries. But the idea of his 10-year-old daughter standing in front of a crowd that large, that prestigious, made something twist in his stomach. Pride. Fear. Maybe both. When he told Meera. She didn't scream or jump or clap like most children might. She just nodded, took a breath, and said, "I need to write something they've never heard before." Sundar's wife, Anjali, tried to be calm. She supported Meera completely, but the stage was intimidating. Harvard's Global Impact Forum was not a school auditorium. It was a crucible. Leaders from around the world would be there. Nobel Prize winners, journalists, professors. It was not a place for a child to stumble. Still. Meera worked every day for the next 4 weeks. She wrote draft after draft, crumpling papers and tossing them aside. She interviewed her grandmother over video call every night, listening carefully to stories that had never been spoken aloud before. She practiced her speech in front of her dog, in front of the mirror, in front of her reluctant younger brother who fell asleep halfway through most nights. The night before the trip to Boston, Sundar found her sitting on the stairs, staring at nothing. "You ready?" He asked gently. She shook her head. "No, but I want to be." He sat beside her. "That's the most honest answer you can give." "What if they don't believe me?" She whispered. He placed his hand on hers. "Truth doesn't need belief." To be real, the morning of the event, the Harvard campus buzzed with anticipation. The auditorium was packed. Reporters, scholars, students, influencers. The lighting was soft, but purposeful. The stage was simple, a red circle in the middle of a sea of black. Speakers had been preparing for months, adults, experts, professionals, and then came Meera. Her name was announced with polite curiosity. A few people even chuckled quietly at the idea of a child speaking at such a serious event. But when she walked out, small, composed, eyes scanning the crowd without fear, the room shifted, not in volume, in energy. Something about her presence quieted the chatter. Her speech began like a story, soft, warm, like a bedtime tale. She talked about shoes. My grandmother didn't have shoes when she was my age. She said she walked barefoot over hopstone and gravel just to get to school. And when it rained and mud would swallow her ankles, she never complained. Because for her, school was freedom. There was no microphone, feedback, no stutters, no awkward silences. She told stories of books wrapped in cloth, of chalkboards wiped clean with leaves, of girls sitting on dirt floors learning how to dream. Her voice never wavered, but just when the audience began to relax into admiration, she changed tone. "I go to a school with air conditioning and smart boards and laptops," she said. "And sometimes we still complain about having too much homework or the Wi-Fi being slow. We forget that the world is unfair. Not because we're bad, just because we're comfortable." And then she looked up. "But comfort," she said, "is not the same as happiness. And silence is not the same as peace." The audience stilled. Even the camera stopped moving. She paused, just long enough to let the words breathe. "We say education is a right. But for my grandmother, it was a rebellion. She wasn't given a place. She built one. And when she couldn't find doors to open, she became the door for others." You could hear someone inhale sharply in the front row. "My name is Meera Pichai," she said, "and I believe we are all born to build something. My grandmother built a school. I don't know what I'll build yet. But I know this: if you've been given a voice, use it. If you've been given shoes, walk far. If you've been given comfort, use it to fight for someone who hasn't." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was Reverend. The first person to stand was an elderly woman in the front row. Then a man in a tailored suit. Then a row of students. And within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, not clapping wildly, not shouting, just standing still and quiet, as if afraid to shatter the weight of what they had just heard off stage. A Harvard professor whispered to his colleague, "I think that child just rewrote what it means to speak truth." But in the green room, Sundar's phone buzzed. Another letter. No name. No number. Just one line. "She has opened a door that cannot be closed. Be ready. He looked up, heart pounding again. This time, with more fear than pride. And somewhere outside the auditorium, far from the cameras and the applause, someone watched them through a screen and made a quiet decision. Asterisk the shadows behind the spotlight. 3 days after the Harvard speech, the world began to move in strange, quiet circles around the Pichai family. It began with a knock on the door at dawn. Not loud, not threatening, just enough to wake Sundar from a restless sleep. He rose carefully so as not to wake Anjali and padded down the hallway with bare feet. The light outside was still the gray-blue of early morning. When he opened the door, there was no one there. Only a small square package wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. It had been tied with red thread. Sundar looked both ways down the street, but everything was still. No cars, no birds. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Inside the package was a single black notebook. The first page held just one sentence. Asterisk. Truth does not rest in applause. It rests in what follows. Beneath it, scribbled faintly in pencil, was a map. Not a full one. Only a portion, hand-drawn, rough, but Sundar recognized it immediately. It was a section of Kanyakumari district in Tamil Nadu, where his mother had grown up. More specifically, it was a stretch of land just outside her village. Land that, as far as he knew, had been left to waste, unused, forgotten. There was a small circle drawn in the corner, labeled only with 2 letters, MP. He closed the book slowly. The knot in his stomach tightened. That evening, while Anjali helped Meera pack her school bag, Sundar sat alone in the garage with the notebook. It smelled faintly of smoke and turmeric, as if it had passed through dozens of hands before arriving in his. He flipped through the rest of the pages. Most were blank, but in the center was a page that had been torn halfway out. On it, a message was scribbled quickly, almost desperately. They buried something there. Find it before they do. Sundar's breath caught. He wasn't a man prone to fear. His life had been full of pressure, deadlines, judgment. But this was different. This was something ancient, personal. It felt like a ghost whispering through time. He debated telling Anjali, telling Meera, but something inside him urged caution. Not secrecy. Just watching the next morning. As they walked Meera to school, a black car parked across the street. The same car appeared the next day, and the next. Never blocking the driveway, never causing alarm, but always there, on. The 4th day, Sundar approached it. He walked across the street calmly, hands in his pockets, pretending to check his phone. The windows were tinted so dark he couldn't see inside. He paused beside the rear window, then knocked twice. Silence. No movement. Then the window rolled down exactly 2 inches. A voice, calm and low, came through. We're not here to hurt. You, not yet. Before Sundar could speak, the window closed again. The car pulled away. He stood frozen, not from fear. From recognition. The voice had an accent he couldn't place. Not American, not Indian. Something neutral, practiced. But what rattled him wasn't the voice. It was the phrase. Not yet. 2 words that offered no comfort. Only warning. Asterisk. Meera was changing too. Ever since the speech, something had shifted in her. She was still kind, still curious. But her questions had grown heavier. Pa, she asked one evening while stirring dal at the stove, why do grown-ups stop doing the right thing when it gets hard? He looked up from his laptop, startled. What do you mean? Mrs. Langford said my speech was inspiring, she said. But then she told me not to bring it up again because it made some parents uncomfortable. Sundar closed his laptop. Slowly. What made them uncomfortable? The part where I said comfort can make us blind, she answered. I didn't mean it to be mean. I just wanted them to think. Sundar sighed. Truth doesn't always arrive politely. Should I change it? She asked, her eyes searching his face. He shook his head. Never soften truth just because. It makes people uneasy. She nodded, but he could see the question still troubled her. She was 10. Too young to carry the weight of grown-up disapproval. Too wise not to feel it. That night, he sat with Anjali in their bedroom and finally told her everything. The letter, the notebook, the car. The voice. Her reaction was not what he expected. She didn't panic, didn't gasp. She listened, calmly, completely. Then she said, "Do you think this has something to do with your mother?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "The stories she never told," Anjali said. "The ones she would start and then stop. Maybe they weren't just memories. Maybe they were warnings." Sundar hadn't thought of that. His mother had always been reserved, graceful, proud. But there were moments in his childhood, brief flashes, when he saw a shadow pass behind her eyes. Times when she'd stop stirring tea mid-motion and stare into the distance, as if remembering something buried deep. He had assumed it was pain from the past. Now, he wasn't so sure. ***. 3 days later, Sundar received a message from an unknown number. No text. Only a video clip. He watched it alone in his office. In the video, his mother was standing at the edge of a field, somewhere rural. She looked younger, maybe 30 years ago. Behind her was a group of girls sitting in a circle. They were laughing, clapping, learning, and she was teaching them. But the camera wasn't held by her. It was hidden. The video ended abruptly, followed by a black screen and one line in white letters. The seed was planted. Now they know it's growing. Sundar gripped the edge of his desk. He didn't know who they were, or what had been planted. But someone had been watching his mother decades ago. Someone had kept the footage. Someone had waited until now to reveal it. Why now? He knew what he had to do. That evening, he booked a flight. Just one. To Tamil on NEU. He told Anjali it was a personal trip. Told Meera he'd bring her something special from the village. He hugged her tightly, longer than usual. She leaned into his chest and whispered, "Bring back a story." He nodded, not knowing that what he was about to uncover would not be a story, but a secret buried so deep it had survived generations of silence. ***. The village hadn't changed much. Dusty roads, mango trees bent with age. The old well still standing near the center square. The children still chased kites in the evening sun, but there was something else now. A quiet tension, as if the air itself had learned to hold secrets. Sundar walked to the edge of the village, following the old map in the notebook. The path took him past abandoned farms, through a thin forest, and finally to a clearing overgrown with weeds and silence. He stopped. It was the same circle from the map. The same coordinates. Nothing remarkable about it, just red soil and a few scattered stones. But as he stood there, he noticed something. The air was colder. Just slightly. Unnaturally. He knelt down and brushed the soil away with his hand. After several minutes, his fingers struck something hard. Metal. Rusted. Flat. A box. He dug with trembling hands. Pulled it free. It was locked. No key. But on the top was carved a single word in Tamil. Eta. IRA. A mencio. He stared at it. Breath shallow. Behind him. Something moved in the trees. He turned. Quickly. Nothing. But the birds had stopped singing. He placed the box in his bag. Stood and walked quickly back toward the village, not daring to look behind him again. ***, back in his guest house, he placed the box on the table. He didn't open it that night. Not because he didn't want to, but because he knew, once it was open, everything would change. Forever. ***, that same night, in a conference room in Washington, D.C., a man in a gray suit tapped his pen against a folder labeled Project Muthare. Across from him sat two officials in silence, watching a video clip of Meera's Harvard speech. The man stopped the video at the part where she said, "If you've been given a voice, use it." Then he looked up and said coldly, "We underestimated her. And now we may have to silence the father before the daughter finds out what he's about to uncover." ***, back in Los Altos. Meera woke from a dream she couldn't remember. And whispered into the dark, "Something's coming." ***, the sealed truth. It rained on the morning Sundar opened the box. Not a soft, forgiving rain. But the kind that beats on rooftops like war drums, shaking leaves from trees and flooding the edges of dirt roads. Thunder rolled across the sky like ancient voices calling out from somewhere deeper than the clouds. In the small guest house on the edge of the village, Sundar sat alone at the table with the metal box in front of him, his fingers resting lightly on its surface, as though touching it too hard might wake something that had been sleeping. Got the word carved into the lid muthre still echoed in his mind. It meant seal, but in older Tamil, it also carried a second meaning, a boundary between silence and revelation. There was no lock, no clasp, only a thin groove along the edge that suggested it could be pried open. Sundar picked up a screwdriver and pressed it gently into the groove. With a soft crack, the seal gave way. The lid creaked open. The smell that rose from the box was old like dried leaves and rusted coins. Inside was a bundle wrapped in faded cotton cloth, tied with a piece of red string, just like the package that had arrived at his door in Los Altos. He untied the knot and unfolded the cloth. What he found inside made his breath catch in his throat. Letters, dozens of them, handwritten on parchment, delicate with age. Some were in Tamil, some in English. They were addressed to someone named Malini, written by different hands over a span of decades. And beneath the letters, carefully preserved between two sheets of waxed paper, was a photograph. A black and white image of Sundar's mother standing beside a young man with sharp eyes and a serious expression. Between them stood a group of young girls holding slates and pencils. On the wall behind them was painted a single word, resist. Sundar stared at the photograph for a long time. He had never seen this man before. His mother had never mentioned him. But something in the posture, in the way the two stood together, not touching, not smiling, suggested something deeper. Not love, necessarily. But purpose. Beneath the photo was a final sheet of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a report. Typed. Official. The heading read, Project Muthre, Preliminary Threat Assessment. Classified. Government eyes on me. His hands trembled as he read. The report detailed a secret initiative launched decades ago to monitor a growing network of grassroots educators in southern India. The group, led by a woman identified as Malini Pichai, had been gathering under the guise of education reform. But the report accused them of something more dangerous. It claimed they were planting ideological seeds designed to destabilize power structures, training young girls to question authority, building a silent revolution beneath the notice of. Sundar dropped the paper. His mother hadn't just been a teacher. She had been a threat. Asterisk, he didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window watching the rain twist down the glass, the weight of discovery pressing hard on his chest. The box now seemed heavier, not just with its contents, but with the truth it had released. And with truth came risk. He knew now what the watchers wanted, what the black car had been watching for. Not him. Not even Meera. They had been waiting to see if he would open the seal, and now that he had, they wouldn't wait anymore. Asterisk the next day, Sundar flew back to California with the letters sealed in a false bottom suitcase. He told no one, not even Anjali. Not yet. As he stepped off the plane, a man in a dark coat stood near the arrivals gate, not looking at Sundar directly, but holding a newspaper upside down. Sundar walked past him without breaking stride. When he reached the parking garage, a folded note had been slipped into his coat pocket. You opened the seal. We know she will speak again soon. When she does, history will turn. Decide which side you're on. Asterisk Meera, meanwhile, was restless. The excitement of the Harvard speech had faded, replaced by a growing unease she couldn't explain. Her classmates treated her differently now. Some looked at her with admiration, others with quiet resentment. A few even whispered that she was only famous because of her father. She didn't mind the whispers, but she noticed how even her teachers had started speaking to her more cautiously, as though afraid of waking something powerful they couldn't control. She spent her evenings alone in her room, writing not speeches, letters, one to her grandmother, one to her future self, one to someone she called the girl who was afraid to speak. Sundar read one by accident. It had been left on the dining table. It said, "Dear girl who's afraid to speak, I know it's scary to say things that might change how people see you. But if you stay quiet forever, nothing will ever change at all, and silence will grow teeth. So speak, even if your voice shakes, especially then." He folded the note and placed it gently back where he found it. His daughter was already becoming more than he could guide. Asterisk, 2 days later. They received an invitation, a global education summit in Geneva, delegates from over 50 countries. Keynote, speakers, world leaders, and one child representative nominated by the Harvard Youth Institute, MEER. The email had no subject line, no sender name, only a message. She inspired a room. Now let her awaken a world. Anjali hesitated. Maybe it's too much pressure. She's still so young. But Meera looked at her calmly and said, "I want to go." So they agreed. Sundar would accompany her. Anjali would stay with their son. They packed lightly. Sundar brought the letters, hidden again, this time sewn into the lining of his coat. He didn't know why, only that something told them they would matter. Soon. Geneva was cold. Crisp air, glass buildings. Quiet lakes reflecting silver clouds. The summit was held in a modern auditorium shaped like a spiral shell, rising in soft curves toward the skylight that flooded the main stage with natural light. The first day passed with polite speeches, graphs, slogans, promises wrapped in perfect language. Then came the second day. MEER, a single quote, S speech was scheduled just after lunch. The audience was restless, distracted. Phones buzzed in laps. Diplomats murmured translations to one another. But when she walked on stage, everything stopped. No music, no announcement. Just a child in a simple dress holding a folded sheet of paper. She spoke without looking at it. "When I was younger," she began, "I thought the world was fair. That people in charge knew what was right. That grown-ups always made the best choices." A pause. "I don't think that anymore." Some delegates shifted in their seats. "My grandmother built a school because no one gave her one. And now we pretend schools are enough. We give children desks and books, but not safety, not freedom, not real voices." Her voice didn't shake. It sharpened. "We talk about the future, but we're afraid of the children who might shape it. We teach them facts, but not courage. We celebrate success, but not honesty." She looked up. "I don't want applause. I want the truth. And the truth is change starts where comfort ends." The room was silent until a single person stood. Not a delegate, not a teacher, but a woman in the third row. Old, bent with age, eyes shining. And she clapped. Slow. Deliberate. Others followed. The whole room rising, echoing the silence with something louder than thunder. Understanding. And just as Meera stepped down, a man in a gray suit approached Sundar from the side of the stage and said quietly, "They've activated the next stage." Sundar turned. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Only handed him a phone. On the screen was a live video feed of his mother's old village, armed men, bulldozers, smoke rising. A voiceover said, "They're erasing the past. Your daughter lit the match." Sundar's knees buckled because he realized the truth wasn't just dangerous. It was under attack, and they were running out of time. Asterisk, the fire they tried to bury when Sundar returned to his hotel room that night. The lights were already on. He hadn't left them that way. The air smelled faintly of burnt wires. And the television, though turned off, flickered once, then went dark. He closed the door quietly behind him and stood still, listening. No footsteps. No voices. Just a silence, so sharp it seemed to hum. He moved slowly, checking the closet, then the bathroom. Nothing. But on the desk where he'd left his laptop, someone had placed a piece of torn paper beneath a glass of water. The message was handwritten in blue ink. She is not just your daughter now. She is history's choice. Prepare her, or they will rewrite her before she knows who she is. He crumpled the note in his hand. Whoever was leaving these messages wasn't trying to scare him anymore. They were trying to move him toward something urgent, something buried. He opened his suitcase and took out the coat with the secret lining. Inside, the letters from the box were still there, untouched. But one of them, the oldest, written in his mother's handwriting, had been moved to the top. It hadn't been when he packed Dot and someone had circled a single sentence in pencil. Truth that is hidden too long becomes myth, and myth is easier to destroy. He stared at the words for a long time, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Then, slowly, he began to understand what was happening. This wasn't about education. Not anymore. This was about memory, power, identity. Someone had realized that Meera's voice was not just powerful. It was awakening buried stories that were meant to stay forgotten. Asterisk, asterisk, the next morning, Sundar woke before dawn. The city of Geneva was still cloaked in shadow, the street lamps flickering faintly against the cold mist. He sat beside the hotel window, looking out at the empty square below. In the distance, a church bell rang once. Soft and lonely, Meera stirred in the second bed, her face peaceful. Her small hand rested on the notebook she always carried with her now. She had started calling it her question book. She didn't write answers in it, only questions, one per page. Sometimes whispered. Sometimes bowled out the last question she'd written had stopped Sundar cold. What if being brave means being alone? He hadn't known how to answer. Asterisk, asterisk at breakfast. Meera asked quietly, Appa, why do some people look scared when I talk? He set down his coffee slowly. Because you make them see things they've tried hard not to see? But I'm just a kid. Exactly, he said gently. You're not supposed to be able to do that yet. She didn't respond right away. She just stared at her spoon, watching it reflect the chandelier above them. Then why did they ask me to speak? She finally asked, because they hoped you'd say something safe, he said. Something nice, something easy. And I didn't. He shook his head. You said something real. She looked down, quiet for a long time. I don't want to stop. I know. Asterisk, asterisk back in India. The situation was worsening. The video. Sundar had seen the day before had been just the beginning. Bulldozers had begun clearing land around his mother's old school. They claimed it was for new development, a hospital, a digital center, words that sounded good on paper, words that made news outlets nod in approval. But Sundar knew better. The real target wasn't the land dot, it was the memory it carried dot, the school. His mother built wasn't just a building. It was a story, a symbol, a rebellion dressed as learning. And now, after Meera's speech had gone viral, after she'd evoked her grandmother's name on the global stage, that memory had been reawakened. Dot and the people who had spent decades burying it were now scrambling to destroy the evidence. Asterisk, asterisk. Sundar made a call to someone he hadn't spoken to in years. An old friend from his Ike days, now working in Delhi. Not quite government, not quite civilian. When he explained the situation, the man sighed heavily. You weren't supposed to open that box, he said. Why does it matter now? Sundar asked. Those letters are over 30 years old. Because some truths don't age, the man replied. They sharpen. There was a pause. They're watching you, Sundar. Not because you're dangerous, but because your daughter might become something they can't control. And my mother? Sundar asked. The voice on the other end hesitated. Then said, your mother was one of the last to believe that education could be a form of resistance. And now, her story is rising again, in your daughter's voice. Asterisk, asterisk, later that day, Meera was invited to a private panel with global youth leaders. They were seated in a circle in a glass room overlooking Lake Geneva. The sky outside was a pale gray, and the water below rippled gently as if reflecting the tension inside the room. A Harvard professor moderated the panel, an older man with silver hair and thin spectacles. He began politely enough, asking questions about climate action, digital equity, education access. The other children answered confidently, rehearsed dot, but when it was Meera's turn, he paused. You spoke recently. About comfort making people blind, he said. Do you think it's fair to accuse people of blindness just because they live differently than your grandmother did? The question was polite, but his tone DWA, single quotes T.me, or didn't flinch. I didn't accuse anyone, she said. I asked them to look. And what if they don't want to? Then maybe they're not ready to lead. The professor smiled tightly. Strong words for someone so young. Truth doesn't check your age, she replied. The room went silent outside the class. A bird flew past. Alone. Asterisk when the session ended. Sundar waited for her outside. Walked toward him calmly, but her eyes were glowing. I think I made someone angry again, she said. He smiled and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Good, he said. That means they heard you. But as they walked back to the hotel, Sundar noticed a woman across the street staring at them. Not just looking, staring. And when he met her eyes, she turned and vanished into a side alley. He stopped. I looked up. What is it? He shook his head. Nothing. But deep inside, he felt it again. They weren't alone. Asterisk that night. Sundar received a package at the front desk. No name. Inside was a video drive and a typed note. If you want to know what your mother died protecting, watch this alone. His hands tightened around the envelope. He didn't even know she'd been protecting something. And she hadn't died not yet. She was still alive, though frail, living in a care home just outside Chennai. He hadn't told her about the letters, hadn't shown her the photo. But now he realized someone wanted him to believe she had already been erased. He went back to his room and locked the door, inserted the drive into his laptop. The video began with static. Then faded into an old recording, grainy, colorless. A classroom. His mother, standing at a chalkboard, but she wasn't teaching. She was speaking directly to the camera. And what she said made the blood drain from his face. If you're watching this, they found the box. Which means they're coming. They will try to change the story, twist the truth, silence the voice, but you must protect her. Because one day, a girl with fire in her eyes will speak louder than any government, louder than history. And they'll be afraid, not of what she says, but of what she remembers. The screen flickered, then cut to black. Sundar stared at the screen. Heart pounding. The message hadn't been for him. It had been for Meera. His mother had known decades ago that this moment would come. Asterisk, and somewhere in a dark room filled with screens, a man in a suit turned off the monitor and said, "We waited too long. The girl is awakening the past. If we don't erase the roots now, the world will hear everything." Another voice replied, "Then burn the school and silence the old woman. Make it look like age." A pause. "And the father?" The man answered coldly. "He'll fall apart once he realizes he's holding a torch he never meant to carry." Asterisk, but in Geneva, as Meera slept under a sky full of clouds, Sundar sat beside her bed and whispered words she wouldn't hear but would one day understand. "You were never just speaking for them." He touched her hand. "You were remembering for all of us." And then, in the silence of that room, he made a choice that would change both of their lives. He picked up the notebook, turned to a blank page, and wrote, "We don't protect truth by hiding it. We protect it by setting it free." Asterisk, when memory refuses to die, a flight from Geneva to Chennai felt longer than Sundar remembered. Perhaps because he wasn't the same man who had flown in the opposite direction just weeks earlier. That man had been cautious, guarded, still weighing the cost of opening truths buried in rusted boxes and faded letters. This man, who now sat with his eyes fixed on the clouds outside the window, was no longer trying to avoid the fire. He was walking into a dot beside him. Meera slept with her head resting against his shoulder, her fingers curled loosely around the strap of her travel bag. She had insisted on coming, despite the warnings. Sundar had tried to reason with her. "This isn't a trip, Meera," he'd said. "This is something dangerous." But her reply had been simple, quiet. If they're burning stories, then I want to stand in the ash and remember them. He hadn't argued after that. They flew under aliases, no press, no announcements. Sundar had changed their phones, wiped. Their digital trail? He wasn't a spy, but years of leadership had taught him how to disappear when necessary. And right now, invisibility was their only shield. Asterisk, asterisk, Chennai greeted them with a heavy sky and the low growl of distant thunder. It smelled like earth and electricity, the scent of monsoon approaching. They traveled by car for hours through winding roads and fields blurred by fog, until they reached the small town where his mother lived in a modest care home by the coast. Building with simple whitewashed walls, a few broken swings in the yard, flowers blooming through cracked tiles. Sundar hadn't seen her in nearly 6 months. Her health had been declining, and the doctor said she spoke less and less these days, retreating into a silence even time couldn't touch. But when he stepped into her room with Meera at his side, the silence shattered. His mother. Dinner then. He remembered, opened her eyes, and smiled, not the soft, passive smile of the old or weary. It was the smile of a woman who had been waiting. He opened it. She whispered. Sundar froze. The box, she said. You found it? He nodded slowly, his heart pounding. You knew, he said. You knew I would? She looked at Meera. I didn't hide it from you, she said. I hid it for her. Asterisk, asterisk for hours. They talked. Not about machines. Not about Silicon Valley. Not about education systems or politics. They talked about memory. About resistance. About how stories could be more dangerous than bullets because once told, they could never be untold. His mother, Malini, had not simply built a school. She had built a network. A quiet alliance of women across villages, trading knowledge like currency, smuggling books in rice sacks, teaching girls how to write their own names before the world could assign them someone else's. They had never taken up arms. They had taken up chalk, and that had been enough to frighten governments. When Project Muthare was launched, the goal wasn't to arrest. It was to erase, quietly, surgically, remove the evidence, silence the witnesses. Flood the land with new words, new buildings, new narratives. But one mistake had been made. They had underestimated memory. Asterisk, asterisk. Malini reached under her mattress and pulled out a small metal pendant on a chain. It was tarnished, unremarkable. But when she pressed a hidden latch on the back, it popped open to reveal a microfilm. This is what they were afraid of, she said. Not me, not the school. This. On the film were names, not just of teachers, but officials. Businessmen. Powerful people who had once supported the cause in secret, and then betrayed it for comfort. If this gets out, she said, some of the people shaking your hand in boardrooms will be the ones exposed. Sundar sat in stunned silence. He had known pieces of this story, but not the magnitude. Not the cost. Why now? He asked. Why give this to me now? Malini looked at Meera, whose eyes hadn't left the pendant. Because she's ready. She said, and you're not afraid anymore. Asterisk, asterisk. That night, Sundar walked the quiet roads outside the care home, alone. He passed shrines covered in marigolds, old women sitting cross-legged under neem trees, boys playing cricket in dusty fields. The world felt ancient and raw, like the skin of something that had never healed, but kept moving anyway. He didn't know what to do. He held the pendant tightly in his hand, the list of names pressing against his palm like heat. If he released this, if he gave it to the press, to the public, it would burn everything. Not just reputations, not just history. His own life would be changed. His family would be targeted. But if he did nothing, the silence would win. And silence, he now understood, was not peace. Asterisk, asterisk. Back in Delhi, the men behind Project Muthare had already begun to respond. In a dark office lit only by the glow of monitors, a man watched satellite images of Sundar's movements. He's got the list. One of them said, asterisk, then we move, Gila replied. Destroy the care home. Make it look like an accident. A moment of pause. What about the girl? We can't touch her. Not yet, not while the world is still listening. Asterisk, asterisk, but it was too late. Meera had already begun her next move. While Sundar walked outside, she sat by her grandmother's bed, typing quickly on the old laptop Sundar had brought for notes. She uploaded her next video, not to a press site, not to a government inbox. She sent it to children.schools.youthforums. She titled it, Stories They Tried to Burn. And in it, she said, "We are not too young to remember. We are not too small to carry truth. And if they try to erase what came before us, we will write it again. Louder." Within hours, the video was shared across dozens of countries. A child in Uganda translated it. A student in South Korea added subtitles. A class in Argentina rewrote it into a song. And just like that, the fire that had been hidden in one small Indian village began to spark across the world. Asterisk, asterisk, but not everyone celebrated. At midnight, Sundar received a call. A distorted voice. "You've made your choice," it said. "Now we'll make ours." Then silence. He ran to his mother's room. The windows were shattered. The bed was empty. Asterisk. Asterisk, no footprints. No noise. Just the faint smell of smoke. And a note. "Pinned to the wall, the root is cut. Now watch the tree fall." Sundar fell to his knees. Ara stood behind him, eyes wide, fists clenched. "They took her," she whispered. But Sundar shook his head. "No," he said. "They just think they did." He stood. Eyes burning, voice steady. "We don't run anymore." Meera stepped beside him. "Then what do we do?" He looked at her, the light of fire growing in his chest. "We remember. We speak, and this time the whole world listens." Asterisk, asterisk, in a bunker far away. The men behind the erasure project watched her video explode across platforms they couldn't shut down fast enough. How did she do it? One of them asked. But the leader, older, more tired, already knew. Because she didn't inherit power, he said. She inherited memory. And memory, once awake, doesn't sleep again. Asterisk, the stage built from silence. That world was different now. Not louder. Not brighter. Just ... listening. A week had passed since Meera's video. Stories they tried to burn broke through the fog of algorithms and political filters and reached the hearts of millions. It didn't trend with glittering banners or digital confetti. It wasn't a spectacle. It was something quieter, deeper. A 10-year-old girl speaking from a small room beside her missing grandmother's bed, telling the world that memory mattered. That silence was never neutral, and that if you lose the stories of those who dared to resist, you lose the future meant to grow from them. But behind the momentum, there was grief. Malini was still gone. No ransom, no message, no trace. Sundar tried to appear composed for Meera's sake, but she knew better. He hadn't eaten properly in days. His eyes flickered constantly, like he was watching a world she couldn't see. One where shadows moved faster than light and trust had turned to smoke. And yet, in the middle of their mourning, the world began calling again, not the way it had after the Harvard speech. This time, it wasn't about novelty. It wasn't curiosity. It was urgency. Emails came from universities, letters from small schools in forgotten towns, voice messages from young girls who had watched the video and finally told their fathers they wanted to learn, not serve. Even governments, cautiously at first, reached out to Sundar not to invite, but to negotiate. They had seen the names, because Meera had made another decision. Without telling even her father. She had released part of the list. Not everything. Just the first 10 names. Names of people who had once donated to the secret education network Malini had built and then later betrayed it in exchange for political favor or business protection. The effect was immediate. The news spread like a virus, not of fear, but of reckoning. Not just for India, but for nations that had propped up similar systems in shadows. It wasn't a scandal. It was a mirror, and the world was being forced to look into it. Asterisk, asterisk. But Sundar was afraid. Not of losing his career. Not of being followed. That had already happened. He was afraid of something else. That Meera was caring too much. That the world in its hunger for truth, would forget she was still a child. So one evening, after another interview request came from a global summit, he sat beside her as she wrote in her question book. He waited. Then asked softly, "Do you want to stop?" She paused. Looked up. "Stop what?" "Speaking," he said. "Fighting." "Remembering." She thought for a moment, then turned the question back on him. "Do you?" He closed his eyes. "Sometimes, yes." She reached for his hand. "Me too." There was a long silence between them. Then she whispered, "But even if we stop, the stories won't." And she was right, because the stories had already begun to spread like seeds on the wind. In Nepal, a girl translated the video into Braille for her school. In Ghana, a teacher used it to start a resistance reading circle. In Japan, an old man wrote a poem called Ashes Bloom, inspired by Meera's words. And back in Delhi, the very men who had tried to erase the truth now held emergency meetings behind locked doors. Because the more they tried to silence the fire, the more it lit torches they couldn't put out. ***, 2 weeks later. The email came, not from a government, not from a journalist, but from a group of students at Harvard, Princeton, Oxford, and Jawaharlal Nehru University working together. They were organizing something called the Memory Summit. A live global broadcast. One stage. 1 hour. Speakers under 18 from around the world. And they wanted Meera to open it. Not because she was the youngest. Not because she was famous. But because they said, in their words, "You didn't just speak. You reminded us that we're allowed." T.O. Sundar looked at the email. Then at Meera. She was holding her pendant again, the one her grandmother had given her. Inside was the microfilm they still hadn't released. She hadn't decided yet whether to share it all, and that, Sundar realized, was the greatest sign of her strength. Not that she knew everything, but that she knew when to wait. ***. The stage was set in a theater in Mumbai, simple, circular, with no curtains. Just an open floor and a single chair in the center. Meera wore a plain kurta, her notebook tucked into one pocket, the pendant around her neck. When she walked on stage, the lights dimmed. She didn't begin with a speech. She began with silence. 40 seconds. Long enough to make people uncomfortable, long enough to make them listen. Then she spoke. "My grandmother taught girls to read in a village where books were considered dangerous." A pause. "Today, I speak not to be heard, but to make sure she isn't forgotten." She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She told stories. About chalk stolen from construction sites. About letters written on banana leaves. About girls who had to unlearn obedience before they could learn math. And then she said, "We are told that history is written by the winners. But sometimes the winners lie, and the real stories survive not in books, but in people. In whispers, in songs, in the scars no one sees." Her voice broke just once when she said, "They took my grandmother." They thought if they took her, the story would die. But stories don't die when people disappear. They die when we stop telling them. And then she opened her notebook. Read the last question she had written. "How do you stop a story?" She looked up. And answered, "You don't. You can only choose which one you live inside." The lights went out. The screen behind her lit up. And for the first time, the world saw Malini's face, not in shadow, not in memory, but in firelight, smiling, defiant, alive in the story that now belonged to millions. ***, a week later. Sundar received a message. No subject. No sender. Just a link. A grainy video. His mother. Sitting by a window. Smiling. Saying, "Softly, they tried to silence me, but you gave me back to the world." And then she disappeared from the screen, but not from history. ***, and schools across the globe. Meera's words were now part of textbooks, not as a lesson, but as a question. Children would read, "We don't protect truth by hiding it. We protect it by setting it free." And beneath that, a line in small, careful print, Meera Pichai. Aged tenant in a world once afraid of quiet voices, a new kind of noise began to rise. The noise of memory refusing. To die out the noise of children asking dangerous questions, dot the noise of a fire no longer waiting for permission to burn.